Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. Now in today's video, we are going to look at how to monitor a Kubernetes cluster with Prometheus and Grafana. So we will first set up a Kubernetes cluster using Minikube, and then we will set up Prometheus and Grafana to monitor it. I'll also deploy an application on the Kubernetes cluster that this Prometheus and Grafana is going to monitor as well. So stick around to see the entire video with Prometheus scraping the metrics from the application, which is an Nginx application, and Grafana displaying it on a dashboard to see that the metrics are coming in successfully. All right, now let's do an overview of the scripts that I'm going to use for this project. And this is the GitHub repository. I'll keep that link in the description below. And the name is Kubernetes Prometheus Grafana. So I have a README that is very informative you can follow to do this project. And then for the files or the scripts, I have 5 YAML scripts. You have a Grafana deployment file. You have an Nginx ConfigMap file. You have the Nginx deployment, Prometheus ConfigMap, and Prometheus deployment. Now I'll go through them one by one. First, let's do the Nginx. Of course, the deployment is just going to have the deployment and then a service attached to it. Now, if you look at the deployment, we have an Nginx application. This is running the Nginx image or the container in the monitoring namespace, and this has the label Nginx. But it has another container, so there are 2 containers in this deployment. One is the Nginx, which is listening on port 80, and then the other is Nginx Prometheus exporter. So this is like the node exporter for Nginx, and this is a container name or the Docker image name for the Nginx Prometheus exporter. It has some arguments in here, and it's listening to port 9113. Now, for the Nginx container, I'm mounting a volume called Nginx config with the mount path and a subpath. Whenever you mount a volume in a container, you have to reference the volume as well outside of the container. So this references this volume mount that I did here. And the name, of course, is Nginx config, as you can see right there. By the way, this Nginx Prometheus exporter is going to run as a sidecar container for the Nginx container itself. So it's just going to run the 2 containers in tandem. Before I go to the Nginx config map, let's look at the service. Simple service. You have an Nginx service. It's also running in the monitoring namespace. The label is Nginx, and it's listening on port 80 and port 9113. As you can see here in the deployment, you have port 80 and 9113. Now this is of type node port. I want to be able to access these services on my browser, so I'm using node port. You can also use load balancer, but because I'm going to use Minikube to set up my Kubernetes cluster, I'm going to use node port. Now let's check out the Nginx ConfigMap. Now in Kubernetes, we usually use ConfigMap to store non-confidential data that is stored in a key value pair form. We can also use ConfigMap to decouple an environment-specific configuration so that if our container or an application has a dependency, we can split it into 2 to kind of decouple it and still make the container be dependent upon that decoupled environment-specific configuration. So that's what we are using this config map for. I'm decoupling the nginx.conf, and this has some work processes. Of course, this is also running in the monitoring namespace, the same namespace as the deployment and the service. And it has some worker connections. Now this is listening on port 80, and it has some location that it's listening to. It has a location stop status and this is the local host. Okay, so this will run alongside the Nginx deployment file right here. Right, so that's for the Nginx. Next, let's look at the Prometheus deployment. I'm using a similar trick for the Prometheus deployment as well. This is Prometheus deployment in monitoring namespace. The label is Prometheus, and the image I'm using is Prometheus. Has some argument, and it's listening on port 9090, right? Now this also has a volume mount, which we call config volume. Of course, if you attach a volume mount, you need to reference the volume itself, and that is the config volume. Now, of course, in this volume, we are running the Prometheus ConfigMap has some volume. We are using that to mount the ConfigMap, which is this file right here, as a sidecar. So you see the ConfigMap reference here as Prometheus config. That will be defined inside this configmap.yaml. And of course, the service is similar thing to the earlier one. The only difference is this is listening on port 9090. Again, we want to access this, so this is of type node port. Now let's check out the config map. So that is for Prometheus. If you click this, we should see Prometheus config, and that is Prometheus config. This also has to be in the monitoring namespace, and then of course some arguments or instructions here to undertake. This basically explains how much time the Prometheus is going to scrape data every 15 seconds. And it has two jobs defined in here. One job is to scrape data from the Kubernetes cluster, which will be listed on this port, localhost and port 9090. And then another job, we are calling it Nginx, and it has a metrics path called /metrics. Now, this is going to collect the metrics of the Nginx application that we want to deploy in it. So, of course, for that, the target is going to be the service of our Nginx. Our Nginx deployment, when you go to the service, it has this Nginx service name. So that is the service referenced here. And then every deployment we are doing is going to be in the monitoring namespace. So this is the namespace we are using. So if you're using a different namespace, make sure this is replaced. And then of course, we are monitoring a service. So this is SVC cluster local. And our service for Nginx listens on port 9113. So go to Nginx deployment, go to our service, and this is a Prometheus exporter listening on 9113. Or is the same information you see right there. Now, once both of them are configured, then we can use Grafana to load the data from Prometheus as a data source to display our information or data on the dashboard. So you have a deployment here for Grafana called Grafana, also inside the monitoring namespace. And then we are using the container image Grafana. This is listening on port 3000. And for the service, is the same information, similar, called Grafana service. And it's listening on port 3000, of course. We want to see this on our browser. So this is also of type node port. Now, lastly, to go through this whole project, I've prepared this README file here that you can easily follow with all the commands and everything, how to deploy and all the steps to go through. So go through this README and you should be able to set this up. You can make changes in the files, of course, just to know what's going on. As far as requirements, you need Docker installed. I'm currently working on a MacBook. So if you are on a MacBook or Windows, you need to install Docker Desktop. If you're on Ubuntu or any Linux platform, you have to install Docker Engine. You also need kubectl to be able to run kubectl commands. And we also need Minikube. This is what we will use to create our Kubernetes cluster. So you will first install Docker or check if it's installed. It's already installed on my system. You will install kubectl, create a Minikube cluster. You will start it, and then we will enable some ingress and metric server add-ons in Minikube. We'll create our namespace we need for everything, and then we start creating the ConfigMaps deployments, and then everything else follows. So join me as I start this entire project from scratch. So first, let's set up our Minikube. Now, before you set that up, make sure your Docker desktop is running if you're on Mac OS or Windows. If you're on Linux and you installed the Docker engine, it's already running in the background, so that's fine. Now, I'm on Mac OS, so I need to make sure this is open and running. So I can minimize this. And so I'm going to follow the README file that I created, which is also on the GitHub repository. First, let me check the Docker version installed. There's a command here, so that's my Docker installed. Now, if you don't have kubectl installed on MacBook, you can use Homebrew to install it, or you can use MacPort to also install it, or you can just install the kubectl binaries. I've already installed it, so I will copy this, run it here, and that is the version of kubectl installed. If you're on Linux or any other system, just Google how to install kubectl. Okay. On any system you will have the installation tools right here for Mac, Linux, or Windows, and you can easily follow that. Right. I have it installed, so that's fine. Next, we need to install the Minikube cluster. You can use these commands. Again, you can Google how to install Minikube. Click this, and you choose your system, and you have the commands for installing it right here. This is for Mac, this is for Windows, and this is for Windows, and that is for Linux. Pick your version, install it. I already have it installed, so I will just check the Minikube version. And that's my Minikube version installed, 1.35. So everything is done, so we can go ahead and create the Minikube cluster with our Docker as our driver. So paste this command here, press enter. It may take a few minutes depending on your system. So our Minikube cluster is ready. I'm gonna clear the screen. And when I do kubectl, get nodes, I have one node, so our cluster is ready. Now, because we want to monitor metrics from our Nginx application and from Kubernetes, we need to enable the metric server for Minikube. It doesn't come already enabled, so you need to enable that. So I'll run this command to enable that. That's done. You also need to enable ingress for traffic. Also another add-on for Minikube. Okay, so ingress is also enabled. Now let's continue and clear the screen. Following the README, let's create our monitoring namespace. That's done. If you do kubectl, get namespaces. There's our new namespace we just created 5 seconds ago. Next, we're going to create our Nginx ConfigMap. Now this will enable the stop status. Okay. Now the stop status is needed for deployment. If you go to the Nginx ConfigMap, you see stop status here. This is a location that Nginx, when you're monitoring, will be probing. Now, if you go to the Nginx deployment, we need this stop status here. While scraping, that has to be available. That's why I'm going to do the Nginx ConfigMap deployment first before I do the deployment. I'm going to first apply this Nginx configmap.yaml. That's created. Of course, it will take it a bit for it to be ready. So when I get ConfigMaps or CM in the monitoring namespace, That is our config map we just created 13 seconds ago. The Nginx config map is done. Now we can go ahead and do the deployment. So copy this to do Nginx deployment. This will create a deployment and a service. Again, it will take a few seconds to get ready. So you can check the deployment in the monitoring namespace with this command that is currently not ready. So the service is also creating. And you can clearly see that our service is a node port. It's created, and this is our node port number. Right, all that. Okay, now let's check the deployment one more time. So now you can see that it's ready 63 seconds ago. Now that it's ready, we can access the Nginx UI. Now to access that, we need to expose it using a Minikube tunnel. Now I'm going to run this command. Of course, this command is just Minikube service because we want to expose the service. Our service name for the Nginx is Nginx service -service, and everything is running in the monitoring namespace. When I access the UI, I need it to be stable. So I'm going to run this command in a dedicated terminal. So I'll open a new terminal by the screen here, and I'll run the command in here. Press enter. And this will expose some URLs here. Just copy this URLs. Your favorite browser. Just gonna close these two. Press enter, and that is the Nginx page. First one for the Nginx. The second one. This is the Nginx Prometheus exporter. Now remember that in Nginx configuration, which is right here, in Nginx deployment, there are two containers here. There's the Nginx, which is this one, and then there is Nginx Prometheus exporter, which is that one. So this is what's going to be scraping the Nginx metrics. And that is via this link here. If you click it, you should see all the metrics that it's already loading. So that is for the Nginx. Go back to the README. By the way, you can also use these links. Both of them still works. Now I'm going to leave this running because I need those two pages I just opened for future deployments. So that is for the Nginx. Okay, now that Nginx is running successfully, let's go ahead and create our Prometheus deployment. But before we do that, as usual, we need to deploy the config map for the Prometheus first. Now, this config map for the Prometheus is what's going to scrape the Nginx Prometheus exporter, which is this one. It has the metrics under /metrics. We need to scrape all this data. And that is the reason why in the Prometheus config map file right here, you see the metrics path is /metrics. And it's scraping it from the Nginx service in the monitoring namespace on this local cluster on port 9113. Port 9113 is the port for the Nginx Prometheus exporter. Well, of course, right now we're using a node port, so you don't see 9113 here, but in the actual file, the Nginx deployment file here is it. It has port 9113, so it's listening to that particular service from the /metrics path, which is this link right here. If you click it, you see /metrics. It will be collecting all this. Let's go to the README. Continue from where we left off. Okay, so you apply the config map for Prometheus. It's gonna clear the screen. Press enter. That's done. Next. Okay, gonna create a Prometheus deployment and services. Copy this. Press enter. Of course, this is also gonna take a few seconds to get ready. So let's see when we check our deployment if it's ready. Still not ready. That is a Prometheus service, which is also a node port. Let's set the deployment again if it's ready. Okay, now it's ready. All right, now that it's ready, you need to access the Prometheus UI. Okay, again, we use the tunneling in Minikube by running the Minikube service. The name of the service for Prometheus is Prometheus service, and it's in the monitoring namespace, similar to the earlier one. Copy this. Again, the Nginx one is still loading or taking traffic. So I'm going to use a new tab by the screen here. And then we'll run this command for Prometheus. Press enter. When you press enter, this is what you get. Now, to access the Prometheus service, you can copy this, run it in your favorite browser. And that is your Prometheus page. Let's go back to the README. Now that you're able to load the Prometheus UI, you go to the search path in the Prometheus UI and search for this. You see how much HTTP requests or hits you are getting from Nginx, and then press enter. So I will copy that, and in the search bar here, I will paste this in there. Press enter, and you see that this is loading. It has 11 hits at this point. Now I can go to Nginx and refresh this page, okay, multiple times. I'll refresh this page as well. And then when I go to Prometheus and I press enter, you see that the count is increasing. That's the number of hits that we are getting from that web application. So that is it for Prometheus. Again, leave this running still in the background. And now we are going to look at how to visualize this in a Grafana web page. So next thing we need to do is to run our Grafana for our dashboard. Now for that, we have a Grafana deployment file here, YAML file. Copy this command. Run this to deploy Grafana service and deployment. Give it a few minutes, get ready. So keep cuddle, get deploy in the monitoring namespace. The Grafana is still not ready. It's been 15 seconds so far. The service should be ready by now. Now, don't forget that all the services, I'm running them as node ports. Okay, so Grafana is also ready. 1 out of 1. You're going to try to access its UI. Then run a similar command as earlier. And we're going to use a dedicated terminal. So I'll open a new terminal by the screen. And this is our Grafana service name. And in the monitoring namespace. Press enter. And this will expose our Grafana on this node port 57144. So copy that on your favorite browser. Paste this link there. Press enter. And you see a Grafana login page. Now in the README, see that I have username admin, password admin. This is the default login for Grafana. So just type admin, login, and it will ask you to change the password because it's not secure. So I'll give it a new password, confirm it, submit. And there you go. That's your Grafana dashboard. Now, we have our Grafana UI. And so let's load our data source into the Grafana. And I have instructions here to follow. Just click add data source, select Prometheus, and then put in this link. I'll just copy this link and I'll explain it. So on Grafana dashboard, this is data source. Click on this. Our data source is from Prometheus. Select Prometheus here. And you see Prometheus is selected there. Now in this URL, paste this link in there. Now what this link does is it goes to the Prometheus service, which is in the monitoring namespace, which is a service on our local cluster, and our Prometheus service is running on port 8080. We go to our README. Let's go to Prometheus deployment. Prometheus service is this service, and it's running on port 8080, right? So that's the meaning of this link. Now you can make some more settings here with authentication and TLS settings and stuff like that, but I'll keep it as default for now. Click save and test, and you see that it's successfully queried the Prometheus API, which is exactly this API here, because it's already getting traffic, right? So it's queried that data. So click on explore view, click on this, and you should get a page, something like a dashboard loaded in Grafana. And all the steps are in the README if you follow it closely. So we did up to this point, and now you say click metrics and select Nginx HTTP request total. And that is the query that we run in Prometheus, where we saw how many hits our website is getting. Okay, so in Grafana dashboard, this is metrics. Go in here and select Nginx. Now, of course, the metrics are a lot, so you may have to search instead of scrolling. This is the variable you're looking for. There are other metrics, okay? Most of them are not numerical, so I just want something that has a numerical characteristic or it's a counter. That's why I'm using this to explain it. This is Nginx app. That's how long our web app has been up. Okay, so I'll select this. Again on the first, it says select it and then refresh Nginx and Grafana pages. Okay, so I've selected that. Then I'll hit this blue refresh button here, and you should see data coming in. Now this is so far data that Prometheus has already scraped. Now if I go to Nginx Prometheus Exporter and I click on metrics, these are all the data that's already been collected. Now you can refresh this page multiple times, which would mean this data here will always be updated. Press this multiple times just to generate more hits in the web app, like that. You refresh this. You see now we have 85 hits with the exact same query. Now on the Grafana dashboard, if you hit this refresh button, you see that the data has been updated. Okay, so that's how you would use Prometheus and Grafana to monitor an application that's running on Kubernetes. You can have multiple applications that are running. So most importantly, you need to know the path that the application collects its metric in. For Nginx, for instance, it usually collects its metrics on the path /metrics, which we set up inside the sidecar container for Prometheus, which loads the metrics right here, and then we'll push it to any source that we use. And by source, I mean in Grafana, you select Prometheus as a source, and Prometheus is also getting its data from the Prometheus exporter for Nginx, which is a sidecar container for Nginx application itself. And now everything is displayed inside the Grafana dashboard like that, indicating how many hits our website is getting. Now you can select more variables here. There are so many variables in here. Some of them are for the Kubernetes cluster itself. Others are for applications that you load onto the cluster. Some are for the Prometheus engine itself too. You can monitor all of these metrics inside this Grafana dashboard. So that brings me to the end of this project. Now before we leave, let's make sure that every resource is running. And for that, I'll run kubectl get all inside the monitoring namespace. Remember, everything we run is in the monitoring namespace. And these are all the stuff we created. You have pods, services, deployments, replica sets, and of course we have ConfigMaps as well. These are the ConfigMaps we created. And you can see everything is in running state. Before we leave, let's do a cleanup. Make sure you delete the monitoring namespace. When you delete that, that deletes all the resources inside it as well. So instead of deleting all these resources one by one, you can just go ahead and delete this monitoring namespace. Now that's deleted. So you should see that you can exit all these. These are running the UIs. You can exit all of them. Even close them all. Let's just close all of them. Okay. So you see that all these pages will go off. Close this. This is also off. Also gone. Gone as well. Okay, with that gone, we can now stop our Minikube cluster. Running Minikube stop. Minikube is stopped. If you go to the Docker desktop, you see that this is our Minikube cluster, which was running as a Docker container. It has stopped. This is the image we used. Now we don't want to just stop it. We want a complete cleanup. So I'm going to delete all. And by all, sometimes you can run multiple Minikube clusters or multiple containers. But if you want to delete all profiles, it will delete all the containers that are running. So delete all will delete the containers in our Docker desktop. Go to containers and now you see there's no container here. These are the images themselves. And of course you can delete them too. That's okay for now. So far everything else is deleted. So I have the link for this GitHub repository in the description below for your use. So you can use it, modify it, and try to learn how to set this stuff up easily. Now, if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please subscribe to my channel as I try my best to record more videos, even though I have a quite busy schedule. Try my best to bring you videos as often as possible. So subscribe, like, and comment on my videos for more videos like this, and I'll see you on the next one.